I think I've had the pleasure of meeting most of you, but for those of you who I have not met, my name is Rich Jaffe, and I'm the head of private banking for North America for Credit Suisse. And once again, I have to say, Credit Suisse is thrilled to be a part of this extraordinary, extraordinary classic car event that we're here celebrating.
I have the great pleasure of introducing each of the panel members. Some of them work with me. I'm the chairman of the Pebble Beach Concours. I get to be Santa Claus once a year, and Christmas is coming on Sunday, and I do get depressed on Monday. It goes way too fast. One of our chief class judges, Alan McEwen, is joining us, and Al's been involved with cars actively since the early 50s, and we like to tease him that he's been the first owner of a lot of the cars we've had on the field. I truly believe that most of us borrow ideas from other people, and I think that Professor Gordon Murray dreams them all up himself. The next gentleman doesn't really need an introduction. He's probably the most famous guy I know of Tonight Show fame. But really, the most important thing for me is that he's truly a car guy. Next is a friend of mine all the way from Florida and the founder of the Revs Institute for Automotive Research. And he also holds a connoisseurship lecture series, which really gets you thinking about the stewardship of cars. He's been the chairman of the board of management for Audi AG. He's been the chief executive at Bentley, had roles with Bugatti, very much an engineering guy, but in his heart, a car guy. He founded the Gooding Auctions, and he's the president, of course, and the founder. He's been a member of our selection committee. I'll let you guys enjoy yourself. Thank you.
All right. I guess tonight's topic, how do we get more older white guys interested in the hobby? What makes a car significant? And this panel has, I think, the knowledge. Who wants to go first? Miles?
Oh, sure. In my view, the thing that makes a car significant is if it creates a bump in history or in our culture, something that changes because of that particular car.
Doctor?
Well, I would take a more general approach. Significant means to me, significant to whom? So, for example, my grandfather's red convertible was a significant car to me, probably not to anybody else. So we have to define first what means significance to whom and why.
There's the nostalgia and we all have nostalgia. Many people in the car hobby come back to buy what they wanted when they were in their teen years and could not obviously afford to get at that time. But that makes the car significant to them, but not necessarily significant to the automobile world as a whole.
Well, that's why you like the Model T, because that was a car when you were a teenager.
Love it.
How about noble failures? Does that make a car significant? And by that I mean the Cord, the front-wheel drive Cord would be the Tucker, cars that were not particularly successful, but because they were kind of ahead of their time but didn't succeed, does that make them valuable?
Well, I think emotionally, every car which has a story to tell, even if the story is a story of not being successful or going the wrong way, if you look at it 50 years later, it's interesting.
Now, I assume a lot of people here probably have trouble convincing their spouse that they should get a collector car. Here are a couple of tips on how to do that. If you had, in 1983, if you had bought a new kitchen instead of an air-cooled 911, that kitchen would now be worth, what's an old refrigerator worth? $200? The 911 now worth $70,000, $80,000, $100,000. So you're having that argument in your home, kitchen or classic car, or dining room set or classic car. Economically, you got to go classic car.
I love it.
That helps anybody. The most fascinating engine that you have seen in your careers.
Geez, I mean, I'm a big fan of how a car sounds. So one of my favorite sounding automobiles, when you can hear it running, is a V16 BRM. A complicated tour de force. It's just a jewel, but and it's very difficult to get them running. But when they run, it sounds like the end of the world.
Let me throw this question out. To me, I find the car boring if I don't find the engine interesting. I've seen some wild Delahaye's, with a fantastic bodywork, And then I open the hood, and it looks like a Chevy six-cylinder. I mean, it basically is what it is. So consequently, the car doesn't interest me. How big a factor does that play? Miles, you're the consummate collector. Is the engine and how it operates more fascinating, or is it the style? What sells you?
In the day, if the car has real credentials in motorsport, I think you have a very attractive automobile. Now, that having been said, as I said earlier about the Delage engine, there's nothing I like better than a bunch of little whizzy bits flying around inside the engine. I mean, that's my thing, right? So a great engine certainly helps to make a car fascinating and interesting and desirable.
It's funny, I was brought up thinking, you know, it's all about what's under the hood. And so I sort of have that bias, and like you say, Jay, it's really, that's the heart of the matter. But now we're seeing, certainly in the market, and I've learned that it's got to look good. If it ain't pretty, it doesn't sell. And what amazes me in today's market, we're seeing, for example, Ferraris, and you talk about this, we see smaller engine Ferraris bringing more money, Dinos bringing more money than V12 Ferraris. I never would have guessed that. And it's because they're beautiful, they're voluptuous, and it's counterintuitive to the way things used to be.
The engine's a lot more than what it looks like, and it's to do with how it sounds and how it drives as well. I think if you look back through, and things change through the decades, don't they? The emphasis on chassis, body, styling, and engines. If you take Grand Prix racing as an example, and collectible Grand Prix cars, in the 50s when Grand Prix racing started, it was 80% engine. All the chassis were pretty crude and pretty similar, if you take the driver out of the equation. Right. And then that changed, you know, as we went through the different eras. And nowadays, it's 80% aerodynamics, unfortunately. Yeah. And the engine is, you know, the engine's only significant in the year they changed the rules, when people are playing catch-up. But once they're caught up, it's all aero. So things change as the decades go on, what makes something collectible.
Let's talk about the future. Let's go to the year 2045, and we're looking back cars of the 80s, 90s, or even 2000s. What's collectible? I would guess first generation Miatas will become sort of the Mustangs of the generations to come, because they were plentiful, they were twin cam, they were fun to drive, and they were easy to work on. Maybe the Taurus Show, 5-speed gearbox, V6 in the front. Is there anything from the 80s or 90s that you gentlemen think, I mean, with the obvious exception of the F1 and you know, limited edition cars like that, you think would become collectible? You know, when I was a kid, we used to buy 59 Cadillacs to go to demolition derbies for $400 or $500 and just crash them because they're 59 Cadillacs. No one will ever want one of those. And then a friend of mine 10 years ago came up here to buy a Cadillac, a 59. I said, how much is it? He said, 75. I said, 7,500? That's crazy. He goes, no, it's 75,000. I said, what? The last one I bought, I paid $600 for it. David, what do you think?
Well, it's interesting, you know, I mean, this is our 11th year here at Pebble Beach with the auctions, and we, first auction had a number of Duesenbergs, or a number of Duesenbergs for sale on the peninsula. There's one Duesenberg for sale in all 6 auctions.
Wow.
And I never would have guessed that we would have 3 Toyotas, a Mazda, and they're some of the cars we had the most interest in our sales. So definitely, yes. I mean, you know, the things are changing, and there's certainly going to be cars that are collectible that people have a demand for the cars that they relate to, certainly.
Another question. I joked about this being a sport of older white guys, or a hobby rather. How do we get younger people interested? You know, I get young people all the time. They know the Ferrari, they know the Lamborghini, they know all the specs, and every once in a while one of them pull me aside and go, hey, what is a turbo anyway? What does a turbo do? They've never been taught the basics. And you know, if your dad never knew how to work a screwdriver, chances are you probably don't. My dad could change points and do things in the car. My mom knew in the Valiant, if you stuck the screwdriver down that air cleaner hole, the car would start. She didn't know why. but she knew that if you took the big round thing off and stuck the screwdriver in, the car would start. Well, you don't really have those problems anymore. How do we get young people interested in the hobby? Miles, what do you think?
Well, the Revs Institute, now there's 2 Revs Institutes. There's Revs Institute in Naples, which basically has archives and automobiles, and we're basically trying to build a community of people that are interested in the car as the single most important technological object of the 20th century. Fast forward to Stanford University, which has the Stanford program, And the REVS program at Stanford is basically one where kids are exposed to the automobile in an interdisciplinary way, and the automobile is used as a lens or as a mechanism to assist in dealing with the discipline within classical academic areas. But at the same time, the automobile brings a level of practicality to these kids that you don't get out of just theory.
You know, I think that perhaps in the computer age, people, when they step away from a two-dimensional screen and they see a car like a gleaming yellow Mercer Raceabout, and they can see it and they fire it up if they go for a ride in a car like that, they go, my God, this car is 100 years old, and the sensory experience of it, it's fantastic. So I encourage everybody to expose other people, get involved, get people out. That's, of course, what the Concours is about. That's what the vintage races are about. That's what all this weekend's about. And get people out there, and you know, people will get hooked.
And just recently, when I had the Hispano Suiza out, a guy in his late teens, very early 20s, came up, and that's not unusual. But this kid, he wanted to know every detail under the hood. And
He was a pain in the ass, is what you're saying.
no, but I was thrilled because, you know, most kids, they don't have that interest. And I don't know where he got it, where he started from, but we need more of those kids.
Yeah.
And he was a joy. And, you know, he wasn't obnoxious or anything. He was a joy.
Gotcha.
He asked questions. And we've all talked the same subject.
Yeah.
How do we get the kids interested?
Yeah, I think there's still a few young petrol heads around. I get them write to me about, you know, how to get into car design and all that sort of stuff. But I think, unfortunately, I agree. I think the sort of century or century and a half of the car innovation is pretty much over. And that's because there's a lot of young people around today who are looking at other forms of transport, car ownership. The model's changing completely. Some people don't want to own cars, particularly in cities like London. There's no point in owning a car if you're 20 years old. It's going to cost a fortune to run.
Yeah.
And there's a big shift in young people's attitude to cars generally. But that's just the way it's going, you know.
Well, I'm a bit more of an optimist because I see now, like this McPherson College, that is, they give a scholarship, a 4-year scholarship in automobile, motorcycle restoration. In the same way a lot of kids go into art restoration, restoring old paintings and that type of thing. You have those same kids. It's not as big a group, mind you, but they're more focused because there's real money in the profession. You know, this is the only country in the world where if you want to be a mechanic, you hold up a sign that says mechanic. Oh, that guy's a mechanic. I know in Germany you have to have a degree. You have to prove you're a mechanic. You know, my favorite sign I see hanging in Burbank, it says, "We specialize in all makes of cars." I don't know how that's possible. But people, oh, he must be good. He specializes in all cars.
Jay, if I could say something, I agree with your optimism because I see so many young people coming in and they're just genuinely turned on. But perhaps what it is that some of the older cars speak to them more than more of the contemporary cars, which are sometimes just so unapproachable. And the older cars have unique styling, they have more personality, and they can understand them perhaps mechanically more. As you know, you lift the hood and you crank it over and you can see the valves going up and down, and so there's a little bit more experience. You know, I take my kids in an open touring car and they're there with the wind blowing through their hair, and it's a different experience than being behind in an SUV with the windows up and the air conditioning on.
Well, I'd make a comment that I think that one really important role for the collector car movement. I don't really like to call it a hobby because I think it's much more important than that. But the collector car movement is that by exposing young people to it, we have one way to combat what I call technological illiteracy. There are so many people today that don't even, they can barely change the bulbs in a table lamp. And that by fooling around with cars, which is one, and once you have exposure to the thing, you smell it, you feel it, you work it, you are transformed, and the ability then to be able to, as you say, get that old Volkswagen running gives you a sense of accomplishment and a feeling of mastery about some of the common laws of nature, which so many people in society today don't have the remotest idea about, because everything is like this. It's totally unapproachable and inaccessible.
Right.
So we're doing the Lord's work, folks, out there making these old cars go.
Anyway, listen, I want to thank our very distinguished panel, gentlemen, and thank you so much for your insight and your humor, and I hope it was helpful to some of you that are in the collector car hobby or getting into it or already into it or whatever. And of course, Credit Suisse, thank you very much. Or Swiss, it's Suisse, isn't it? We have to be very, Credit Suisse, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Credit Suisse. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. That's right.